There is a particular kind of stillness that settles over Charlotte just before the sun comes up. It is a thick, humid quiet, the kind you can almost feel resting on your skin if you sit out on the porch long enough. For a man my age, 72 years old, that early morning silence is more than just an absence of noise. It is a diagnostic tool. I sit there with my coffee, I look out at the yard, and I listen to the internal machinery of my own body. I wait to see if my chest feels tight. I wait to see if my legs have that heavy, waterlogged sensation that makes just standing up feel like a negotiation with gravity. I feel for the pulse at the base of my neck, right where the collar of my shirt rests, waiting to see if it is thumping with that hard, aggressive rhythm that used to be my constant companion. When I sit there now, and all I feel is the steady, quiet hum of a heart doing its job without a struggle, the relief is something I can barely put into words. It is the relief of a man who spent years walking on a frozen lake, hearing the ice crack under his boots, who has finally made it back to solid ground. Today I want to talk to you about the things we are taught to fear and the things that are actually pulling us under while we are looking the other way. We are going to talk about that persistent, dragging exhaustion you might be feeling by 2 in the afternoon, the kind you blame on not sleeping well enough. We are going to talk about a massive lie we have all swallowed about what constitutes a dangerous meal. And I am going to tell you exactly what my doctor told me when my blood pressure was redlining, a conversation that completely reversed everything I thought I knew about food, meat, and the hidden traps hiding in plain sight in our kitchen pantries. I am not talking about complicated medical theory. I am talking about the practical, everyday decisions that decide whether your heart gets to rest or whether it has to work overtime until it simply gives out. When you are raised the way I was, born down in Columbia, South Carolina in the 1950s, you inherit certain beliefs about food and health without ever really questioning them. You learn that a strong man eats heavy meals because he has heavy work to do. You learn that complaining about physical discomfort is a sign of weakness. I spent my entire career working in public transit, starting out in the yards and eventually moving up to supervisor roles. It was an environment where stress was not something you managed. It was just the air you breathed. You dealt with broken down buses, angry commuters, impossible schedules, and the constant pressure of keeping a city moving. I worked 12-hour shifts, lived on whatever food I could grab quickly, and ignored every single warning sign my body flashed at me. I believed that because my shoulders were broad and my constitution was tough, I was immune to the mathematics of aging. I thought that as long as I kept moving, the numbers on my medical chart did not really matter. But the truth I had to learn the hard way is that pressure rarely rises alone. It rises with the habits we ignore. For years, whenever I thought about my health or my weight or my creeping blood pressure, I blamed it on the obvious targets. I blamed it on the fact that I loved a good steak on the weekend. I blamed it on the pork chops we would have for Sunday dinner. Our culture constantly hammers this idea into our heads that red meat is the ultimate villain, the fast track to a heart attack. So, in my late 50s, when the headaches started becoming a daily occurrence and the ringing in my ears got louder, I decided I was going to be responsible. I started cutting back on the meat. I ordered the chicken instead of the beef. I passed on the steaks. And to make up for it, to make sure I was still eating enough to get through my shifts, I started leaning heavily on vegetables. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was making the responsible, mature choice for a man entering his later years. The wake-up call was not gentle, and it did not come with a polite warning. It came during a routine medical exam that was required for my supervisor position. I was sitting in that little room with the paper crinkling under me, feeling mildly annoyed that I was losing an hour of my day. The nurse took my pressure, looked at the dial, frowned, and took it again. She did not say a word. She just left the room. When the doctor came in, he did not have that casual bedside manner you expect for a standard checkup. He pulled up a stool, sat down, and looked me dead in the eye. He told me my numbers were catastrophic. He told me I was walking around with a blood pressure so high that my vessels were under constant brutal strain. He said I was not at risk of a stroke eventually. I was at risk of a stroke today. The coldness that settled in my stomach in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was the absolute, undeniable realization that my stubbornness had pushed me to the absolute edge of the cliff. Most people wait for a scare before they change. I had mine, right then and there. I tried to defend myself. I told him I had cut back on the red meat. I told him I was eating more vegetables, more sides, trying to be careful. He looked at my chart, asked me a few specific questions about my daily meals, and then he said something that stopped me in my tracks. He told me to stop fearing a piece of steak and start looking at the vegetables I was eating. He told me that the specific type of vegetables I was consuming every single day was actively destroying my vascular system faster than any piece of meat ever could. He was talking about canned vegetables, the green beans, the sweet peas, the mixed carrots and corn that I was buying by the dozen because they were cheap, convenient, and never spoiled. I was eating them constantly, thinking I was getting my greens, thinking I was protecting my heart. I went home that afternoon and sat at the kitchen table with my wife, Gloria. Gloria is a woman who does not panic. She spent her life running the front office of a middle school, which means she knows how to look chaos in the eye and organize it. She saw the look on my face, and she knew something had shifted. I told her what the doctor said. My daughter Danielle, who works as a nutritionist assistant, came over later that evening. She is the one who took the cans out of our pantry, put them on the table, and made me actually look at the labels. She showed me the numbers. A single serving of those canned green beans had more sodium in it than a large order of fast food French fries, and I was not eating a single serving. I was eating half the can at dinner, thinking it was just a healthy vegetable side dish. This brings me to the profound misunderstanding that almost cost me my life. We are conditioned to categorize foods entirely by their base name. If it is a vegetable, it is good. If it is meat, it is bad. But when your body is fighting hypertension, the base name of the food does not matter at all. The processing matters. I realized that by avoiding a plain cooked piece of meat and substituting it with heavily processed, sodium-soaked canned vegetables, I was essentially pouring gasoline on a fire. I discovered that the secret enemy of my heart was not the fat I was avoiding, but the astronomical levels of sodium I was unknowingly drinking down with every serving of those soft, salty vegetables. A stable life builds a stable body, but my body was drowning in salt. Think about it like the transit systems I supervised for all those years. Imagine the blood vessels in your body are the roads and highways of a major city. When things are running smoothly, the traffic flows, the pressure is low, and the system functions perfectly. When you eat a piece of meat, you are essentially sending heavy cargo trucks down the highway. Yes, it is heavy, and yes, it requires the road to be in good condition. But the road can handle it if the traffic is moving. But when you consume massive amounts of hidden sodium from canned vegetables, you are not adding cargo. You are flooding the city with water. Sodium forces your body to hold on to fluid. It literally pulls water into your bloodstream, increasing the sheer volume of liquid that has to be pumped through the exact same narrow roads. The pressure inside those roads skyrockets. The walls of your arteries have to stiffen just to keep from bursting under the force of that water volume. The heart, the engine of the entire system, has to pump twice as hard just to keep the flooded roads from completely failing. That is what I was doing to myself every single night. I was avoiding the cargo trucks, but I was intentionally flooding the highways. Danielle explained to me that the canning process relies on a heavy brine of salt to preserve the food and maintain its color on the shelf for years. You are not just eating a green bean. You are eating a sponge that has been soaking in salt water for 18 months. When you swallow it, all that sodium enters your bloodstream immediately. The doctor could not explain it any simpler. He said my arteries were becoming stiff and rigid because they were constantly fighting the water pressure I was creating with my diet. He told me that a lean piece of beef, seasoned properly, was infinitely safer for my stroke risk than a bowl of those canned, sodium-heavy vegetables. It was a complete paradigm shift. It made me think of a guy I used to work with down at the main terminal. Let us call him Thomas. Thomas was terrified of having a heart attack. His father had died of one, and Thomas was determined not to repeat history. He refused to eat burgers. He never touched bacon. He brought his own lunches every day. But his lunches were always microwave meals, canned soups, and canned vegetables. He thought because there was no visible fat, he was safe. He thought he was outsmarting his genetics. Thomas had a massive stroke right there in the dispatch office when he was 58 years old. He survived, but he never worked again. He lost his mobility on his left side. He lost his independence, and he lost the retirement he had been working so hard for. I remember visiting him in the rehabilitation center, seeing this strong, capable man struggling to hold a plastic cup of water. I did not understand it then. I thought it was just bad luck. But sitting at my kitchen table, looking at those sodium numbers on the cans Danielle had pulled out, I realized Thomas did not have bad luck. He was killed by the things he thought were saving him. That memory hit me with a physical force. The fear that I was on the exact same trajectory as Thomas was cold and absolute. I looked at Marcus, my son, who had been telling me for years that I needed to take this seriously. Marcus works in insurance. He looks at actuarial tables all day long. He sees the mathematical reality of what happens to stubborn men who refuse to change their habits. He told me he was not going to let me become a statistic just because I liked the convenience of popping a can opener. I realized that my refusal to understand the mechanics of my own body was an act of extreme selfishness. I was putting my pride and my convenience ahead of my family's peace of mind. So we changed the system. We did not do it slowly, and we did not negotiate. Gloria and I took every single can of vegetables in that pantry, put them in a heavy-duty trash bag, and got rid of them. We did not donate them because I could not in good conscience give someone else the very thing that was actively destroying my own vascular system. I had to fundamentally change the way I viewed a plate of food. I had to stop looking at food as just a way to stop being hungry and start looking at it as the daily operational maintenance required to keep my engine from exploding. Control begins with what you stop normalizing, and I stopped normalizing the consumption of hidden poison. The practical action I took was immediate and absolute. I switched entirely to fresh or frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables, I learned, are flash frozen at the peak of their freshness and do not require the heavy sodium brine to stay preserved. They are just a vegetable, nothing else. We started buying big bags of frozen green beans, broccoli, and spinach. Gloria started steaming them or roasting them in the oven with a little bit of olive oil, black pepper, and garlic powder. The first 2 weeks, I am not going to lie to you, it was difficult. My palate was so incredibly accustomed to the heavy, aggressive taste of salt that the fresh vegetables tasted like absolute nothing. They tasted like water and grass. I sat at the dinner table, chewing on roasted broccoli, wondering if I could really sustain this for the rest of my life. But I remembered Thomas holding that plastic cup. I remembered the look in the doctor's eyes, and I kept eating. The heart pays attention to what we repeat every day. It does not care about your intentions. It only cares about your actions. After about 3 weeks, something strange started to happen. My taste buds, which had essentially been calloused over by decades of sodium abuse, started to wake up. I started to actually taste the sweetness in a roasted carrot. I started to taste the earthy flavor of a green bean. But more importantly, the physical sensations in my body began to shift. The heavy, waterlogged feeling in my ankles at the end of the day started to recede. The constant, low-level ringing in my ears faded away. I realized that I was no longer waking up with that dull, throbbing pressure at the base of my skull. I also stopped being terrified of a simple piece of meat. Once I removed the massive influx of sodium from the can sides, I found that I could eat a sensible piece of chicken, a pork chop, or even a steak occasionally, without feeling that immediate rush of pressure in my chest. The transit routes were clear, the floodwaters had receded. Because the vessels were no longer tight and rigid from fighting the sodium, they could easily handle the normal digestive process of a protein. The doctor was exactly right. The meat was never the primary problem. The problem was the salt mine I was consuming alongside it, dressed up to look like a healthy vegetable. 6 months after that terrifying doctor's appointment, I went back for my follow-up. I walked into the clinic feeling a quiet sense of ownership over my own body that I had not felt in 30 years. I sat on the table, and the nurse wrapped a cuff around my arm. I did not close my eyes and brace for impact this time. I watched the numbers on the screen. The reading was 124/80. The nurse smiled. When the doctor came in, he looked at the chart, looked at me, and asked exactly what I had been doing. I told him I threw away the cans. I told him I started respecting the mechanics of my arteries. He told me that my stroke risk had plummeted to that of a man 15 years younger. He told me that the behavioral shift I made was more powerful than any secondary medication he could have prescribed. You do not want your first real warning to be an emergency. I took my warning, and I changed the course of my life. I am not telling you this to give you a medical lecture. I am not a physician, and I know that everyone's body is different. I am telling you this because I know exactly how easy it is to be fooled. I know how easy it is to walk down the aisle of a grocery store, see a picture of a green farm on a label, and assume you are doing the right thing for your body. I know how comforting it is to blame the obvious targets, like meat, while ignoring the silent, invisible threats sitting right there on your plate. We are fighting a battle against an environment that makes it incredibly easy to be sick and incredibly difficult to be well. You have to arm yourself with the truth, not just the marketing slogans. I still have days where I look at a menu and want to order the easiest, saltiest thing on there. The desire for comfort never entirely goes away. But then I think about my 3 grandchildren. I think about the fact that they need a grandfather who can actually walk around the park with them, not one who is confined to a chair because he was too stubborn to read a nutrition label. I think about Gloria and the peace of mind she deserves in her retirement, instead of the constant anxiety of waiting for my heart to give out. My health is the foundation of their stability. The transformation is never perfect. There is no finish line where you are suddenly immune to the choices you make. It is a daily practice. It is a choice I have to make every single time I open the refrigerator or walk into a grocery store. But I am in control now. The fear does not dictate my days anymore. I am still here, living in Charlotte, watching the seasons change. I am still moving, still learning, still adjusting the routes to keep the traffic flowing. And tonight, when I sit down for dinner, there will be vegetables on my plate, but they will be real, fresh, and completely free of the poison that almost took me away from the people I love. Because being here tomorrow requires doing the right thing today.